Hey everyone, today has been a very long day, and I'm just now coming back from a lecture that I had to do earlier in Annapolis, Maryland, and that was a good 2 hour drive there and a 2 hour drive back. So I'm hoping to kind of catch up on everything with regards to my class, Roots of Racism. And for people who are new to this class is basically a class that's covering bias, prejudice, and systemic oppression. We're currently in our third week. Tomorrow we will be going into our fourth week of this class. And as we kind of move along, we're discussing some of the foundations of what bias is, discrimination, racism, systemic oppression, what's going on, classism, colorism. We're kind of going over everything. My class is open to everybody, and for those who are actually in the Google Classroom, we have about 800 people that signed up in the Google Classroom. So it's a lot of people, and today we're going to get to the second half of the book, Biased, by Jennifer Eberhardt. And so last week, not even last week, earlier this week, we covered chapters 3 and 4. And last week we covered The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, the first two chapters. And this is really setting the foundation of what we're going into next, because next we're going to be going into the media and the perceptions of Black criminality, Black pathology, and stuff that's in the media. We're going to talk about minorities and how we present it in the media as well. And we're going to be talking about a lot of different things coming up. And so also this week, one of the things that my class had to do was watch 13th. It's available on Netflix. It's freely available. You don't have to pay for it, but it is a wonderful documentary by Ava DuVernay. And it talks about a lot of the stuff that's being covered in this book. So I try to give people lots of different ways to learn. I want to make sure that if you're a person that takes in stuff visually, then you have that visual stimulation. If you're a person that takes in information through words, guess what? You have the books that's going to cover the exact same information. If you're a person that really needs some help and you can't necessarily read the books, then we actually have resources to read the books to you. So we try to make it as accessible for everybody as possible. My heart goes out to a few of my students because some of them are sick. Others have other life events that they're dealing with as well. And I understand that people are going to fall behind just a little bit, but I just want people to know that you're not really behind. The class is asynchronous. We're going to be moving forward, but I also want people to understand that if you submit work, I am still going to read your work. I am still going to respond to your work. And I want people to feel comfortable that they're not really lagging behind. They can still get the interaction. I'm still going to be there, and I support all of you guys as we kind of move forward. So this lecture is being streamed on both YouTube Live and TikTok Live. And before I get into this, I just want to just let everybody know, for those who are in the class, that I haven't gotten around to grading everything, but I will be finishing up. The last couple of weeks being sick has really put everybody off their game, including me. So let's go ahead and get started. So this lecture is covering chapters 6 and 8. So chapter 6 in Bias by Jennifer Eberhardt is the scary monster, and chapter 8 is the hard lessons. So that's why the lecture is named The Scary Monster and the Hard Lessons, and how bias shapes our reality. So we've been discussing a lot about racism, because you can't really separate yourself from racism and say that you're not going to deal with it or anything. And it isn't a thing of the past. We like to tell ourselves that progress is linear, for instance, and that history stays history, and it doesn't. Because the truth, and the uncomfortable, unavoidable truth, is that the past is always with us. The images, the narratives, the biases that shape centuries of oppression, it is always with us. They didn't disappear. They evolved. They adapted. They embedded themselves in ways that we don't see it. And this doesn't always mean that they aren't shaping the world that we live in today. We can't have a conversation about anything that's going on in this country, in the United States, or even in Europe or anywhere in the West, without having to address racism and having to address history. Because we can always look back at pictures and say, oh, this young girl that was the first girl that went to an integrated school, That was history, right? That young girl just turned 70 years old. That was 65 years ago. Is that really history? Jennifer Eberhardt in Bias lays this out for us in ways that are hard to ignore. Because bias isn't just about personal prejudice. We discussed that in week 1. It's about systems. It's about culture. It's about those deep-seated ways we've been trained to see the world and each other. So let's look back, right? Let's take a look back, way back. And I can't really even say way back because I'm talking about the 19th century. We're in the 21st. So let's look back at the 19th century when scientists were measuring skulls. And they were studying faces and drawing conclusions that would justify centuries of oppression. So we had men like Samuel Morton and Josiah Nott. They weren't wrong. They were dangerous. They took science, the pursuit of truth, and bent it to fit a narrative that said that black people were less than human. This is the whole thing about eugenics. And you see a lot of that going on today. Do you think that a woman was pulled from the Joint Chiefs of Staff and a decorated black 4-star general just pulled from the Joint Chiefs of Staff just because they weren't fit to serve that role? No, it's all because of eugenics. It's because there are people out there that will like to think that women are flawed, black people are flawed, Hispanics are flawed. They measured skulls and declared white people the most intelligent. They published charts comparing African features to apes. They fed a system that needed justification for slavery, for segregation, for oppression. And here's the thing, those ideas never really went away. And you can find them front and center within our government right now in how they're moving about as they're firing people, as they're laying people off, as they're replacing people. So let's fast forward to today, where Eberhardt's research shows that even now, in the 21st century, we still see echoes of this same bias. So in one study where people were subliminally exposed to images of apes, for instance, right? And do you know what happened? Their attention shifted towards black faces. The association between blackness and animal imagery is so deeply ingrained that it can be triggered without conscious thought. This isn't a theory. This is real world consequences. So when black men are viewed as more animalistic, they are more likely to be perceived as dangerous, more likely to be met with excessive force, more likely to be denied their humanity. George Floyd wasn't a mistake. Trayvon Martin wasn't a mistake. Any number of black men who have been unalived over the past decade or two, or even longer, it wasn't a mistake. Bias isn't just what's in our heads, it's about what's in our institutions. It's about how we police, it's about how we judge, it's about how we make decisions, even when we think that we're being fair. So let me tell you a story about Bernice. In 1967, she was one of the first black students to attend an all-white school in Mississippi. She wasn't looking to make history. She just wanted a better education. But the moment she walked into that building, she became a symbol, a target, a reminder to her white classmates that the world was changing, whether they liked it or not. She was isolated. She was mocked. She was made to sit alone in algebra class while the teacher taught right past her, and yet she excelled. She made it to the honor society. She rose above. This right here is an example of resilience. And it's something that so many black people have to master. They have to be resilient. We can't afford to just give up. We can't afford to just turn over and die. We can't afford to just look the other way half the time. We have to face things and be above and beyond. But let's be honest about what that kind of resilience costs. Let's be honest about what it means to carry that weight, to be the only one, to be the first, to walk into spaces where you are not wanted and you have to prove over and over again that you belong. Remember the quote that you have to work twice as hard to only get half as much. That's true for all black people, but it is especially true for black women, who make up the most educated group of people in the United States and probably worldwide. So all of the stuff that I'm talking about, this isn't just history. This is now. And Eberhardt's research shows us that black students today still face these biases in school. How often do you have to be told nowadays that, oh, because this is the new thing, oh, you're too woke, you're a DEI hire. You only got this position because of DEI, not because you're not smart enough, not because you're not intelligent enough, not because you have a mastery of your subject matter. It has to be based off of something other than intelligence, because other people need to feel better about themselves. And so black kids are disciplined a lot more harshly, and they're more likely to be suspended for minor infractions. And they're tracked into lower level classes. They're underestimated and overlooked. And let's talk about what happens when schools claim to be colorblind, because there is no such thing to be colorblind. Because that's the approach that a lot of institutions take, that if we don't talk about race, then it won't be a problem. But the research says otherwise. Studies show that when children are taught to ignore race, they don't become less biased. They just become less likely to recognize discrimination when it happens. That when a black student gets tripped on the soccer field, a child trained to be colorblind is less likely to see it as racism. When a teacher disciplines a black student even more harshly than a white student for the exact same behavior, a school that avoids discussing race is less likely to address it. So we can understand that silence doesn't solve the problem, it deepens it. So what do? We can talk about all this stuff until we're blue in the face, but part of the reason for having these discussions and part of the thing that we're working towards is once we get to week 8, we want to start having conversations on how we actually affect social change. So the question isn't whether the bias exists. We know that it does. Everybody knows that it does, whether you acknowledge it or not. The question is, what do we do about it? We start by acknowledging that these biases don't just disappear, because they're not going to disappear just because we wish them away. We start by looking at our schools. We start by looking at our workplaces, our justice system, and we start asking the hard questions about the ways bias is baked into the system. We know that it's there, but how do we actually turn what we know into intelligent speech and into intelligent discourse? And we start hammering the people who are in charge. We start hammering those legislators, and we start asking them the questions about how we get rid of this, and we start holding them to task. That's when we act. So in education, we start pushing for policies that don't just integrate schools, but ensure that every student, regardless of race, is seen, heard, and valued. In policing, we move beyond training and look at the deeper structures that create these disparities. And in our daily lives, we check our own assumptions. We challenge ourselves to think critically about the way we see people, the way we make decisions, and the way we move throughout the world. I have mentioned before that this isn't necessarily a black or white issue, because the people that actually turned this whole thing into a whole racial system, a racial caste, was actually the wealthy versus the poor. And the one ways that they kept the poor whites and the poor blacks from being allies. It's to actually make them feel better about themselves so that they will think harshly about other people. And this is where we start getting to in-group, out-group bias. So we understand, right, that as we kind of get out here and we're looking at all this stuff, we understand that this isn't just about policies. Policies is only going to change so much. Policies is only going to put a patch over a broken system. This is about people. It is about culture. It is about deciding every single day that we will not be ruled by fear, that we will not let the ghosts of the past define our future. And Eberhardt's research tells us something very important, something that a lot of people truly understand, that bias is learned. Prejudice is learned. Racism is learned. So this means anything that can be learned can be unlearned. It's shaped by experience, which means that it can be reshaped. And that's the challenge before us, not for us to pretend that we're beyond bias, but to confront it, to acknowledge it. We can't just sit here and pretend that none of this stuff exists. We can't just wish it away. To do the work of breaking the patterns that have shaped this country for far too long, we have to address it head on. Now, the thing is, I understand that any work worth doing is going to be hard. And this stuff is going to be hard. It is going to be uncomfortable. And I know for some, the instinct to turn away and to say that this isn't my problem is easy. But the thing is, when we refuse to confront bias, when we allow it to persist in our institutions, in our schools, and even in our minds, we are making a choice. So even the illusion of making no choice is still a choice. And even making no choice is still a negative choice. So when I say that the choice before us isn't just about policy, it's about who we are. It's about what kind of country we want to be. This means that we have to get up. We have to fight. We have to demand what's going to be better for us. We have to get out there and be representatives of the type of society that we want to see, regardless of whether we want to do the work or not. It's going to have to happen. So let's do the work. See, this class isn't just about going over theory. It isn't just about pulling up stuff in the past. We're talking about a lot of different things. We're talking about so many different things. We're talking about how, not only what the issues are, but how we address the issues and what we can do about the issues. So we have to have those conversations. And that's one of the things that I try to encourage as much as possible in my class. If somebody does a discussion post, then go back and reply to somebody else, because your experience is going to differ from their experience, and the way that they grew up is going to differ from the way that you grew up. What happens in America is the same thing that happens over in Europe, throughout the UK, throughout Poland, throughout Germany, throughout Austria, throughout Switzerland, Sweden, Scotland, Ireland. It happens everywhere. So let's have those conversations. Let's push for the change that is long, long overdue, because the future is not written. What we think is going on now is not what's going to happen within the next few months, within the next few years. Nothing is written. Only the past has been written. So if the future is not written and it is shaped by what we do right now and today, then we have to start doing that. And I, for one, believe that we can definitely do better. But it starts with education. It starts with learning. It starts with addressing the elephant in the room. Understanding that bias isn't always what we think it is, and that making policy is going to fix it. No, what's happening is that we have to change people, and sometimes we got to start with ourselves. This concludes this particular chapter, and we're going to be going into more stuff tomorrow. But I wanted to at least make sure I had the lectures up for Biased by Jennifer Eberhardt for chapters 3 and 4. That was done earlier. It's on YouTube. This is for chapters 6 and 8. Some of the same things that I talked about in this lecture is in the book. And for those of you guys who would like to read these chapters and you like to read the book, it's on the Google Classroom. You can go to week 3. The PDFs are there for you to consume. And I'm hoping that everybody is at least learning something. I know that we have different time zones. We have different availabilities. Some people are working at this time. Some people are just now getting off of work. Some people are putting their kids to bed. Some people are just tired. But I do hope that this is of some benefit, that we're actually addressing some of these things. We're having these conversations. We're putting definitions to word. I remember one person was saying that they didn't know that there was a difference between prejudice and racism. And we talked about how racism is prejudice plus power. And then we have to define what that power is. We have to define what it means to have power. And why is it that certain groups of people they can't be racist because they lack the power. I was having a conversation earlier with my wife, and it was along the same lines of racism, and we were discussing masculinity, specifically toxic masculinity. How even something when it comes down to racism and you have the power dynamics, but you also have the dynamics on masculinity is a power dynamic as well, because there is no such thing as toxic femininity. And we were having this discussion because women typically lack the power. Why isn't it also plus history? History does play a role in it, Heidi. But when you're looking at it, history plays a role in the sense that the power comes from history, that there has to be a historical sense. For instance, you can't just automatically say that, all right, this group is now in control and they're being racist towards another group. There's no history. There's no institutionalization. There's no policy. There's a lot of stuff that really have to make up this point. And that's one of the things that's covered in some of the previous lectures as well. You're welcome, Melissa. So as we kind of go through this stuff, for those who missed the earlier lectures, feel free to go through and yes, you can't really separate the history and the power part, because when you look at this country, right? When you look at the United States, how did people get into power? How did we actually get to the point of indentured servitude to slavery to Jim Crow to black codes to civil rights, all of that? How did we get all the way up to here? There is history behind it. But in that history, you look at who holds the power. How did race even become part of the picture? And that's something that we covered last week. We had people who were wealthy, and they started the whole racial caste system. We went into how this was all discussed in the 13th Amendment, and how even with this new racial caste, that when it comes down to minorities, especially black people, there's an exception to slavery in the 13th Amendment. When we start actually addressing how slavery is still legal. And that one line is, unless you've been convicted of a crime. But this is one of those topics that I find myself constantly having to bring up and constantly talking about, because a lot of people, they miss out on those cues that actually say that we're living in a racist society because of this past, because of this history. Earlier today, I was at a church, a United Methodist Church, and we were talking about men and mental health. And I was part of a panel, and on this panel, I'm talking to them about how we believe the things that we believe and why we believe the things that we believe. And I had to go into social learning theory, and I had to go into social identity theory and how we end up being what we consume. And this is one of the things that I touched on here, that we learn bias, just like we learn how not to communicate, or we learn how to be prejudiced against another group. We learn this, and all this stuff can be unlearned. But while I'm doing this talk, I had to hit home a lot of different things. And some of those things is that we are shaped by the choices that we make. Even who we follow, what videos we interact on social media, how long we actually look at a video, how long we interact with somebody on a post. All of this stuff kind of shapes what we see on our social media, but it also shapes how often we're fed this information as well. So if we get to the point where we're only looking at positivity, and we're only feeding ourselves positivity, and we're only feeding ourselves educational content, that's what you're going to become, because you are going to become what you consume. And as much as we like to avoid that, we can't avoid it. If you're fed ratchetness, guess what? You're going to get ratchetness. If you're fed intellectual discourse, that's what you're going to become. We have to get to the point where we need to prioritize our education over our entertainment. It doesn't necessarily mean that you get rid of the entertainment. It means that you're prioritizing that growth, and you have a growth mindset. You're prioritizing getting more intelligent, getting smarter. You have to make yourself get to the point where you're no longer the product, because we're all the product, being on TikTok and YouTube and Instagram and Facebook and everywhere else. We're all the products. The more time they make us spend on here, the more time that we're spending not getting smart. We're dumbing ourselves down. But this is all another topic for another day. Tonight I have to go ahead and get up next week's lessons, get up the quizzes, the discussion posts. I still have to do a lot of grading. I appreciate everybody being here, that's been listening, that's been joining. Especially those who have been very consistent. I see you. I appreciate you. I want you guys to know that you are appreciated. I definitely appreciate the questions, and anytime that you have anything that you want to ask, whether you're asking it here, whether you're asking it on the Google Classroom, ask it so that we can go ahead and address this. We can have these conversations. I want us to have these conversations. I want us to interact with each other. Everybody is welcome to my class. Everybody. So it doesn't matter whether you're white, black, Hispanic, Arab, Chinese, Korean. We have everybody in my class. It's about 800 people. Just know that everybody is welcome. Everybody can join. It doesn't matter. All of the lectures are uploaded and recorded. So even after this one is off, you'll be able to upload. You'll be able to go back and review it on YouTube. And I'll also be linking to it in the Google Classroom as well. If there's any questions, feel free to ask them now. And I'll wait a few seconds because there is still plenty of work. We're going into week 4. It's basically a halfway point. And then after this class finishes, there's been requests to do a deep dive on the new Jim Crow. And that's going to be a 12-week class. And then there's another class that I have that's going to be talking about movements and resistance. And that's going to be coming in for the summer. But the next class possibly is going to be a deep dive into the new Jim Crow. And we're going to take our time with that book. Even though we only covered 2 chapters here, we're going to take our time with that book because there is so much to cover that I wasn't able to get to and we only just touched on. but I really want people to understand it, and we'll probably do something a little bit different on how we address and how we do that class, because I want that class to be an overall discussion, which means we'll probably use something like Google Meet in order to do it. So if that's the case, I'll probably still stream it as well, but I want to make sure that people are getting the nurturing, the nourishment for their souls that they need, so we can actually continue to have these conversations, and that you guys become stewards of this information and you become agents of change. So that's the whole goal. I want you guys to take this information, learn how to think critically about it, and then continue to be agents of change and continue going forward. It is perfectly fine, MCB. I needed that as well, because I've been behind because of being sick. But I don't want you guys to worry about the work. You turn the work in if you can. You don't have to. But if the work, being able to turn it in, is just going to help you guys learn and grow and move forward. So just, if you need any accommodations, just write me. I respond back to people all the time. If I don't respond right away, it's probably because I haven't gotten to it in my email. And I know I have about 100 emails just from the class alone that I have to get around to. But otherwise, I want you guys to have a wonderful night. The next lesson is going up tomorrow. If you fall behind, don't worry about it. You can still turn in the work. I'm still going to read your work. I'm still going to respond back to you. And I want to make sure that, everybody's getting what they need. And if there's any way that I can help you guys, I can be more accessible, I can be more accommodating, let me know, and we'll continue from there. Have a good night, and we'll talk soon. I'll probably do the next lecture about Tuesday or Wednesday, and we'll start hitting the next thing. We'll be going over Just Mercy next week. We'll start covering some chapters from Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. If anybody has seen the movie, you already know what to expect. So if you've seen the movie, wonderful. If you read the book, even better. But you already know what to expect. So take care, everyone, and have a good night. It's on the syllabus, Tiffany. So if you log into the classroom, the syllabus, it has it listed on the syllabus. And it should be the first couple of chapters as well.